2 words. Posted while the game was still live. Tagged straight to the team of the player she'd just left bleeding on the hardwood. If you think that's the whole story, stay with me, because what happened in the hours after that post is messier, more revealing, and more uncomfortable than the foul itself ever was. By the time we're done here, you're going to understand why people inside the WNBA can't even agree on what just happened in their own league. Let's start with who was standing at the center of this before a single whistle blew. Sophie Cunningham didn't stumble into being a lightning rod. She built that reputation on purpose, game by game, statement by statement. Forward for the Indiana Fever, and for an entire season she positioned herself as the loudest, most consistent defender of Caitlin Clark, the most talked about player in the sport. Cunningham didn't keep her frustrations behind closed doors. She named names. She called out officiating publicly. She said out loud what a lot of people were only whispering, that certain teams had discussed making Clark absorb extra punishment on the floor. That's not the kind of talk that wins you friends across the league. Her politics didn't help soften the target either. She'd been open about where she stood, and the internet responded the way the internet responds, with a nickname designed to shrink her down to a punchline. She wore it without flinching, which, depending who you ask, either made her more respected or more resented. Possibly both, by different people at the same time. So walk into that arena with me. Not just a basketball player taking the floor, a walking flashpoint. Some people in that building were watching her differently before the ball was even tipped. Now the play. And I want to slow this down, because the basketball part of this story is actually the simplest part, even though it became the most argued about. Cunningham breaks free on a fast break. Wide open. Nothing but grass in front of her, heading toward what should have been an uncontested 2 points. Trailing the play is DiJonai Carrington, guard for the Chicago Sky. Carrington has a choice in that half second. Contest the shot, foul cleanly to stop the clock, or let it go. Instead, she swings her forearm through Cunningham's face and neck with real force. Cunningham goes down hard. The ball somehow still drops through the net on the way down, but nobody in that building is thinking about the 2 points. Play stops. Officials review the contact frame by frame, and they upgrade the call to a flagrant 2, the most severe foul classification that exists in the WNBA rulebook. That's not a call officials hand out casually. For contact to reach that level, for boxes have to be checked. Excessive force, high risk of injury, a player in a vulnerable position, and no legitimate attempt to play the basketball. This foul checked every single one. Carrington never went for the ball. She went through Cunningham. A flagrant 2 carries an automatic ejection. No debate, no discretion. It's baked into the rule. And afterward, the officiating crew didn't hedge on it either. They said Cunningham's furious reaction on the floor was completely understandable given the severity of what had just happened to her. Translation: the people whose entire job was to make the correct call in real time weren't confused about what they'd just seen. So on the basketball itself, the contact, the review, the ejection, there's genuinely no controversy. That part of the story is closed the moment the officials make the call. Carrington doesn't stick around to hear any of that context, though. She's already walking toward the tunnel. And that walk off the court is where this stops being a basketball story. Here's a version of this night that never becomes a headline. Carrington heads to the locker room, cools off, maybe says something measured to reporters after the final buzzer, maybe says nothing at all. That version doesn't happen. Instead, while the game is still being played on the floor, she just got sent off of. 4th quarter, clock still running. She opens her phone, goes to Threads, and posts 2 words. White privilege. Nothing before it. Nothing after it. Then she tags the Indiana Fever directly. The team of the player, the white player, she had just fouled hard enough to draw blood. No caption explaining what she meant. No follow-up post clarifying the context. Just the phrase, the tag, and a timestamp that places it squarely in the middle of a game that hadn't even ended yet. It doesn't take long for the internet to draw a conclusion, and honestly, it's not a hard conclusion to draw. Commentators, fans, analysts, pretty much everyone watching lands on the same reading. Carrington is suggesting her ejection was racially motivated, that she, a black player, was held to a harsher standard because the player on the other end of that foul happened to be white. You don't need forensic analysis to connect those dots. Ejected for hitting a white player immediately posts white privilege, tags that player's team. People read exactly what was put in front of them. and the context around it made it land even harder. This wasn't some anonymous mid-table matchup. This was Sophie Cunningham, already deeply tied up in the culture war conversation swirling around the league, already known as Clark's most vocal defender, bleeding on the floor, while the player who put her there broadcast white privilege to the internet in real time. The story didn't need help writing itself. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange, because Carrington didn't let it sit. She engaged directly with her critics, specifically with commentator Emanuel Ako, who had broken the play down cleanly and explained exactly why it had nothing to do with race and everything to do with the rulebook. Ako was direct. He called her framing uneducated and off base. He pointed out that players of every background pick up hard fouls in this league. Flagrant calls aren't handed out along racial lines. They're handed out based on contact, risk, and intent. His breakdown was thorough enough that a lot of neutral viewers felt like the conversation should have ended there. Carrington's response didn't end it there. She said the foul itself wasn't what she meant by white privilege, that people had made an assumption, and she told Ako to use his critical thinking skills. She brought up her academic background, referenced the university she attended and coursework she'd taken related to the subject, essentially arguing she'd never used that phrase carelessly. She said there was more nuance to it than people were reading, and that the public had jumped to the wrong conclusion. Here's the problem with that walk back, though, and it's a pretty simple one. If the post wasn't about the foul, what exactly was it about? She posted it the second she left the floor. She tagged the team of the player she'd just hit. At the time she posted it, there was zero additional context on the table, no other event, no other statement, nothing else happening in that window that white privilege could plausibly have been referring to. Under those conditions, telling the audience they misread it isn't really an explanation. It's a redirect. Ako's response to the walkback was short and sharp. In a speaker-oriented exchange, the responsibility for what's communicated sits with the person doing the communicating. She posted it. She tagged it. And no amount of citing coursework after the fact changes what people watched happen live, in real time, with their own eyes. If this had stayed contained to Carrington, Ako, and the usual noise of sports Twitter, it probably fades out within a week. It didn't stay contained, because other people close to the situation weighed in, and what they said turned this from one bad tweet into something that exposed a much bigger fracture. Sydney Colson, who played alongside Cunningham on the Fever the season before, responded to the entire incident by saying she thought it was fantastic. Not "that's a shame." Not "I hope she's all right." Fantastic. This is someone who shared a locker room with Cunningham, who knew her personally, choosing to publicly celebrate the fact that a former teammate had just been hit hard enough in the face to bleed. Sit with that for a second, because it's arguably the most telling detail in this entire story. It's one thing for a rival fan base to enjoy seeing a player they dislike take a hard hit. That happens in every sport, every league, every rivalry. It's a completely different thing when the celebration comes from someone who actually knows the player, who stood next to her in practice, who understands exactly what kind of impact that hit represented. That tells you the divide here isn't fan versus fan. It's running through the relationships between the players themselves. Then there's the reaction or non-reaction from Cunningham's own head coach, Stephanie White. After the game, White told reporters she didn't believe Carrington had intentionally gone for the neck, that she wasn't opposed to the hard foul itself because nobody should expect a free layup to just be handed to them, and that Carrington was simply competing hard. Read that again. That's the head coach of the player who was just struck in the face hard enough to draw blood, choosing to frame the moment as competitive spirit rather than defending her own player. The referees on the court that night, whose entire job is neutrality, showed more visible concern for Cunningham's condition in the moment than her own coach did standing at a podium afterward. Zoom out from the individual reactions for a second, because there's a pattern sitting underneath all of this that's bigger than one foul or one tweet. The WNBA right now is in the middle of the most significant growth stretch in its history. Attendance climbing, media coverage expanding, a level of mainstream attention the league has been chasing for decades. And a meaningful chunk of that growth is tied directly to Clark and the players closely associated with her, Cunningham included. Arenas that used to sit half-empty are selling out. Broadcast schedules are being built with an eye on when Clark's team plays. That's not a controversial statement. It's been widely reported and discussed across the sports media landscape all season. And yet, some of the sharpest resentment inside the league seems to be aimed at exactly the players driving that surge. A hard foul that goes well past competitive contact. A tweet accusing the league of racial bias, posted mid-game with no context. A former teammate publicly cheering an injury. A head coach whose response to her own player getting hurt reads more like a defense of the person who hurt her. None of these things happened in isolation, and when you line them up next to each other, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a pattern. Now, to be fair to every side of this, because a story like this deserves fairness even when the facts are frustrating, nobody serious is arguing that flagrant fouls only happen to one type of player, or that hard contact in this league runs along racial lines. Ako made that point himself. Players from every background have picked up hard, ugly fouls in the WNBA, and they will again. That's not the part anyone's actually disputing. The part that turned this into a national conversation wasn't the existence of the foul. It was the specific decision, in that specific moment, to frame a clean and correct officiating call as evidence of racial bias, with a tag and no explanation, while the game was still being played in the building where it happened. That distinction matters, and it's the one that kept getting lost in a lot of the online arguing over the following days. The ejection wasn't controversial. It was earned, and even the people enforcing the rules said as much afterward. What was controversial was everything that came after the whistle. So where does that leave the league? The WNBA is standing at maybe the most important inflection point in its history. Bigger audiences, bigger money, bigger cultural relevance than it's ever had. And in the middle of that exact moment, you've got a hard foul that draws blood, a tweet that reframes it in racial terms without context, a former teammate openly celebrating the injury, and a head coach whose comments sound more like sympathy for the aggressor than support for her own player. That's not four unrelated headlines. That's a league that seems to be, in certain corners, actively uneasy with the very success it's currently experiencing, and specifically uneasy with the players most responsible for that success. The real question walking away from all of this isn't whether the foul was dirty. It was, the officials confirmed that in real time. It isn't really whether the tweet was racially charged either, because the timing made almost any other reading difficult to sustain. The real question is what kind of league the WNBA actually wants to be during the most important stretch of its existence. Because right now, the actions of some players, some coaches, and some voices inside that ecosystem are sending a message that cuts directly against the momentum the league has spent years trying to build. And the fans sitting in those newly sold-out arenas, the ones who showed up because of Clark, because of Cunningham, because of exactly this kind of drama and exactly this kind of excellence, they're watching every second of it play out in real time. You don't get to control a narrative once it's already written itself. And this one wrote itself the moment two words hit the internet while the game clock was still running.